I think Call of Duty has historically been denigrated as a gutless game, something to be soullessly thrown out every year. While there's some truth to the second part, I've never quite felt the first was fair. Its often needless veneer of edge in the tonal shooting scenes or Modern Warfare 3's nuclear devastation does serve a purpose. It hasn't really pulled its punches, though I've often wished those punches found more targets, especially after all these years. Its geopolitical backdrops have always added flavour to the world, but lack some of the bite you would expect from it. An extension of the military-industrial complex at its worst, and surprisingly biting criticism of even itself at its best, Call of Duty's commanding presence of the shooter genre is partially down to its edge, partially down to the era it launched in, and of course, partly owed to the tight gameplay. None of these things would have thrived just as much as they had if a community hadn't formed around it, and in this sense, Call of Duty represents a very specific time in the online gaming community, one that evokes equal dashes of nostalgia and ire to this day. When Immortals of Aveum started to make the marketing round, complete with the next Call of Duty creative director at its helm, it pitches itself as a Call of Duty with wands, but it actually harkens back to a much older era. Its lack of ADS and focus on movement conjures feelings of playing a boomer shooter, and this is something that made intrigue just the right kind of person. Ascendant Studios, the company behind Immortals of Aveum, laid off around half of its staff within a year, and more shortly followed. EA, the company which funded and published this project, didn't like its sales either, suggesting its likelihood of a comeback is very, very low. I've been waiting for some time to really delve into Immortals of Aveum, and that time came almost a year after its launch. Here's what I learned when I revisited Immortals of Aveum. Set in the world of Aveum, a magical dimension caught in the middle of a constant unending war for resources, 2 of 5 kingdoms fight over control of all 5. They do so by capturing key points of power and using the planet's own magic in their fight. In the centre of all 5 kingdoms lies the Wound, a deep pit that, alongside the Roshanians, threatens what peace Lucium has. Jack, our main character, is from Lucium and is a scavenger. He's someone who skips the draft to fight in the Everwar and pickpockets others to survive with a handful of others in his small found family. When Luna, one of the few providers in this house, is killed in a raid ordered by Sandrak, the leader of Roshan, and the rest of Jack's family are killed by toppling the building they're in, he is recruited in Luna's place, her last dying wish. Most soldiers in Aveum focus on 1 or 2 forms of magic, yet Jack can master all 3, hence the name. He is a literal jack of all trades. This gives you access to green magic, which is essentially a submachine gun that can lock on, blue magic, which functions like a semi-automatic rifle, and red, which is a shotgun. These can be customized in ways to change their rate of fire, function, and more, but this is enough to give you the gist of how they work. With some enemy barriers and shields using different types of magic, you are encouraged to swap between magic on the fly to do the most damage. As well as this, you have a shield you can use with your other hand while you fire, you have special moves associated with each magical type, like a lash to pull things closer, and an interrupting ray that can stun. These all come together to give you a decent amount of combat creativity once you start firing. As I mentioned before, Immortals of Aveum does away with the need to aim, apart from a few specific weapons, and instead likes you to focus on constantly moving and blasting. It takes after boomer shooters in this way, and this idea can be rather engaging when done right. As far as gameplay is concerned, I found it to be a little slippery on console, with both movement and aiming, but it is much snappier on PC. It doesn't have aim assist on console, which isn't a problem inherently, but it feels like it compensates for this by making shooting very forgiving. This leads me to often not quite appreciating my best shots as they end up feeling inorganic in very noticeable ways. Despite this, gameplay is still fun, and swapping in and out of different magic types can work when you use a special move to take out a shield, and you're now pummeling the enemy with a blast of red magic to the face. Enemies can take a while to kill, with many of them being mini puzzles you have to figure out as you tackle a space. This does mean that, despite the focus on speed, you're often left trapped in arenas, firing blindly until everything is dead. In this sense, there is some tension between these two ideas. Instead of giving you long, winding maps to mow through many enemies, or tough enemy encounters with multiple stages, combat is a little too quick to fully invest your time into, and a bit too slow to feel satisfying to tear apart. Somehow, despite Call of Duty attempting a more grounded look at combat, it's a more immediately appealing power fantasy thanks to its low TTK and breadth of guns. The gameplay isn't all about shooting bad guys though. It has plenty of puzzles to tackle in the 15 or so hours it will take you to get through that central campaign, and some of these puzzles can't be accessed immediately due to the rollout of new powers. This gives you a reason to run through sections you've already explored before, hoping to get a new piece of gear or some money to spend on upgrades. Though areas are defined and structured, one central area has you go back and forth via teleporters, which functions similarly to a central hub. Unfortunately, many of the puzzles are pretty bare bones conceptually, and the rewards you get from them aren't really worth the slug of running through the same encounters in the hopes of something new. See, the biggest incentive to explore more of Immortal of Aveum's world is gear and currency. You can swap out all 3 central magic types and a few central bits of gear to get an extra dodge before its cooldown or to do more damage from certain sources. For the most part, I ignored min-maxing my build and just chose the weapons that felt the best to use and the gear with the biggest number on it. When a secret chest gives you another weapon that more or less does the same thing as your current one, why would I spend my time figuring it all out? Immortals also has 3 major skill trees that you can spend points on, which are unlocked through getting the game's version of XP. These correlate with the central magic types, but also have some synergy with the lot, meaning everything gets upgraded a little if you spread them all out. This is fine, I suppose, but not creative enough to encourage you to think too hard about it. Immortals of Aveum has a broader creativity problem that this XP system kind of enunciates well. Take the story, one that is perfectly serviceable for the world it wants to set up, but mostly shoved with regurgitated plot twists and awkward pacing. When I said the biggest incentive to explore the world is gear and currency, it's because Immortals really fails to go almost any deeper than the opening 20 minutes until the very end. There's ample opportunity to build on the world, its aesthetic isn't necessarily bad, and there is room for characters to grow, but it tries to grab so many things that it all slips through its fingers. It's fundamentally a mishmash of fantasy tropes wrapped in that militaristic aesthetic, and often sounds like your little brother who is obsessed with Fortnite trying to explain the works of Tolkien that he's just had summarized via a YouTube video. Sometimes this energy can be incredibly endearing in a game, but when a game commits and you just can't, it can instead feel quite alienating. Like a superhero movie where you don't particularly care if the big bad is defeated. The movie thinks you care, so it amps up the strings, raises the stakes, and blasts the trumpets as our hero takes his final punch. If you aren't on the edge of your seat, you probably aren't in your seat anymore. It isn't really helped by the fact the story itself is rather stop-start throughout, and if you backtrack, most of your time will be spent blasting through enemies you've already killed once before. Immortals is a game built on a love of the creativity of fantasy, yet it is itself uncreative. I do have to temper some of that ire because it actually does succeed in many areas. Some of the VO work is good, and the story does explore some places I didn't think it would. For instance, as Jack starts to look outside of his empire and to Ahriman, a land blown up in the Everwar, you meet an anti-war wanderer named Kenzie. She clashes with Devin, a faux aristocrat and practical imperialist, who is almost glad her home was destroyed in the war and wishes to continue that war. Cracks of the foundations of Jack's beliefs appear here, but he's kind of content on appeasing the two, and doesn't really make any decisions of his own until it's thrust upon him near the very end of the game. The story touches on ideas of militarization, dehumanization, ecological disaster, and I certainly appreciate the attempt, but like Call of Duty's own criticisms of imperialism before it, it feels half-hearted. This is a story in dire need of a little more introspection. The tone can feel a little weird as a result. Everything is treated with this jovial air that takes the worst of Marvel and Forspoken's dialogue. Jack is treated as a little scamp, and the whole dialogue starts to feel a little, boy, he's right behind me, isn't he? You can talk to individual characters, and this gives you more of the world, though that tone can make it hard to want to pick up all those little collectibles and notes. The tone itself isn't necessarily the problem, but that its dialogue and world building isn't strong enough to carry it. Sardonicism isn't the problem here, it is the specific way that sardonicism is written. Strangely, despite me wanting more from the story, the themes, and, well, pretty much everything, it is also an oddly long game with tedious sections littering the middle of it. You might take 10 to 15 hours to beat it, but only really half of them propel that story, and the semi-automatic blue magic genuinely ached my fingers so much from firing. However, after those 15 or so hours it took me to beat the game, I did want to look around a little more. There are extra hard, optional bosses, and I took my time figuring them out to try and take them down. The gameplay, when it feels right, is good just to turn off your brain and shoot at stuff. Though the gear and level up system do feel quite uninspired, I did feel happy to just watch the numbers go up. Immortals proves Call of Duty was a little more than just a simple military shooter, and blasted itself in the foot with a lightning bolt whilst doing so. Immortals of Aveum feels like a game out of time, not just for its mechanics, but its entire approach to the industry. I like to imagine this as the kind of shooter I would have picked up as a kid for my Xbox 360. I imagine the studio behind it put out this game 3 years ago and have already moved on to start their fourth project since. Yes, I'm critical of Immortals' tone and, well, a litany of other things, yet I'm glad it's a game that exists. Single-player only shooters set in original worlds are getting rarer and rarer, and when you account for the 10,000 plus jobs lost this year alone in the industry, and the multitude of great studios crushed by corporate greed, I think it's a massive shame that 6 out of 10 games aren't allowed to thrive. The teams behind them aren't allowed to grow, and they aren't allowed to take that criticism and make a better game with it. Fundamentally, from playing Immortals of Aveum, I feel like Ascendant Studios is capable of much better. There are plenty of elements I like about the game, and with a little more time it could become, I wouldn't say great, but I would say good. Puzzles could more intuitively and smartly fit into the world, the story could dig deeper and look for more. It could work. I went back and forth a lot when making the title for this video, and I may go back and forth a few more times before it goes live. That's because I don't want to put the blame of Ascendant Studios' closure entirely on itself. Within less than a year, the vast majority of Ascendant Studios have been laid off, with the game seeing sales of up to 70% off in mere months. Speaking to IGN, a former developer said the game cost $120 million to make. They said, "Sure, there was some serious talent in the development team, but trying to make a AAA single-player shooter in today's market was a truly awful idea, especially since it was a new IP that was also trying to leverage Unreal Engine 5. What ended up launching was a bloated, repetitive campaign that was far too long." Immortals was lost, pulled in many different directions, and had a huge budget for an idea that didn't really need it. Money was thrown at this thing from EA, seemingly because of the talent on board. That same anonymous employee told IGN, "At a high level, Immortals was massively overscoped for a studio's debut project. The market is volatile, and needing a game like this to sell millions in an already big year with an ever-expanding market is unsustainable. When games cost upwards of $70, Immortals was competing for space with titles like Baldur's Gate 3 and Armored Core in August, with Starfield following just a few weeks later. The industry is ever-expanding. Growth models require everything to be a big hit, and people post-pandemic just don't have the time they once did to play games." The IGN article above talked about this rather poignantly. Though a developer thought tackling corporate greed by reducing CEOs' pay and unionizing are good solutions, this seemingly wasn't the answer to Ascendant's problems. They said, "There's plenty of layoffs due to gross mismanagement and greed, but there's also plenty that happen because this is a stupidly volatile market that requires mountains of capital to participate in at a professional studio level. For all the things Ascendant did right, it did not work out." I looked rather favourably on those 6 out of 10 games from 2009 earlier on, but the industry is a very different one to what it used to be, and Immortals of Aveum kind of proves that. Those games do still exist, but mass layoffs and burnouts are killing many of the teams slowly. Even just recently, Humble Games, the publisher, was suddenly closed, ironically given the source by IGN owner Sif Davis, leaving a developer unable to even publish its own Switch port. The industry is moving incredibly quickly, and real lives are caught up in that inertia. Immortals of Aveum was capable of better things, and it's because the developers behind it are too. I just hope they stay around long enough in the industry to fulfill that. Also, while I have you, the SAG-AFTRA, or Screen Actors Guild American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, is currently striking to enforce protections against AI voice acting in the games industry. Not only do I think taking work away from actors by using their own voice is shameless, but eliminating human expression and creativity away from this work is detrimental to games long term, so I'd like to voice my support. EA, who partnered with Ascendant Studios for Immortals of Aveum, is one of the struck companies, so I'd advise letting your voice be heard in any way you can. I was deliberating putting this video on hold entirely, but the FAQ for the strike encourages any creators to still cover these games and just ask they voice their support in return. If you want to support too, you can do so via social media, or you can strike in person if you remember. You can also check out a list of struck games right here. It's good to not only care about the games, but the people who create them. Thank you for watching my video on Immortals of Aveum. This is one of those videos that I didn't quite expect to end up here. I do like a lot of background research when I write my scripts for these things, and that sort of sends you down a really strange rabbit hole where you kind of notice all these things linked in very saddening ways. And it didn't feel right to me to not mention the broader industry because of what's happening with Ascendant. Well, as well as that, with the Call of Duty mentions, I was tempted to take them all out, but I also think that's kind of important framing for the way this game was seen. It makes sense that like they've spent all this money and they have ex Call of Duty devs, and Call of Duty is this huge game, so of course they're expecting it to do well, and then it doesn't. So I felt like that was necessary to talk about. If you liked my video or any of my others, please do subscribe. I genuinely can't believe it, but I hit 500 subscribers. That was my pipe dream goal, to hit by next January, and I've somehow done it in just over half that time. I feel incredibly grateful that people are clicking on these videos and connecting in some way. So thank you so much.